Hello, it's Spence, the evil genius, with your WordPress tip of the day. Alright guys, today I'm going to do another user request type of video, and this might lead to a series of 2 or 3 videos, probably make it into a full course. But basically we got a nice forum post here by Lucia. If I'm not saying it wrong, I'm sorry, it might be Lucia, but here basically what it amounts to is that they're doing a custom page using the Responsive LabZip theme, and that's nice because basically we're going to show you how flexible it is, and basically we're looking at trying to get a result that looks something along the lines of this, and hopefully it's okay to share, but here's where they are today. And so let's dig into some of these questions, and I'm going to pick and choose here a little bit. Basically wants to see how to do a white color header, which is full screen width. Next, to put the menu bar on the left with just text, no boxes, and I think what Lucia's talking about is this area here. Next, make the 1/3 of the page bottom a semi-transparent gray color. I think what they're talking about is what we've got here, this kind of overlay. And then lastly, whoops, make widget boxes semi-transparent color 2, assuming a similar process to 3. All right, so basically the answer to your question is it possible to make the LabZip theme look like this? Of course it is. That's the beauty of it. Let's go through these step by step though, because basically, and I got to stop saying basically, but it is so basic. Primarily what we're talking about is using some simple CSS, and that's something we've done in other videos. So let's do it today and maybe knock through at least 2 of these, maybe more of them. And if the video goes long, I'll just break this up into several videos. Okay. First thing we need, as always, is to use our trusty Firebug tool. Now I've gotten people who have asked me, can I just use Chrome with the Chrome built-in inspector? Yes, you can. The reason I use Firefox with the Firebug is twofold. Number one is Firefox has the most liberal of the caching setups by default, or even when you modify it. And that means that unlike Chrome and unlike Safari, it doesn't have a persistent tendency to keep the old page content the way it was. And although it doesn't happen all the time, I've been fooled many times when using Chrome that I'll make a change, save that CSS into the template file, and then come back, refresh the page, only to find that it hasn't changed at all. And that's because a browser, in order to become speedier, will save a lot of the page content, and by default Chrome setup tends to be persistent. So does Safari. Whereas Firefox, I don't know why, it's its origin, or maybe because I'm using the nightly build. When you change something, you reload the page, you see what you need, and to me that's great. The second reason is that I like Firebug for one big reason. Watch what happens when I inspect with Firebug. I've shown you this before, but let's say I make a modification to an attribute on one of the elements here. When I right-click at the top, I could just copy the whole rule declaration. And that saves me from having to do this, which is to highlight and copy everything like I would have to if I was using the Chrome extension. Personal choice, I just like it better. Use whatever tool suits you. So I'm going to need Firebug inside of the Firefox browser, and you can use this on PC or Mac. I'm going to use Transmit, which is my choice of an FTP editor, or I should say client. And then lastly, I'm going to use Smoltron, which is again just a text editor that I like. It's very lightweight. You can use anything you want. A lot of people like FileZilla for doing FTP. A lot of people like the built-in text editor for text editing. You can even use, heaven forbid, Dreamweaver as your FTP editor. But again, be careful because Dreamweaver will by default save a lot of junk that you don't see, including hidden lines, spaces, stuff that CSS will be very forgiving of, but if you get into the PHP files, it might actually start generating some mystery errors. So I don't encourage people to use Dreamweaver, especially since you don't need it. None of the stuff that Dreamweaver is designed for is going to help you here. All right, so let's dig in. What are we going to do first? Well, let's take the easy stuff first, and not so much easy like it's dramatically different, but just easy because I'm going to show you some ideas. First of all, the question of how do you make the white color header, which is full screen width. And we've done this ourselves before because you'll notice at 1WD-TV or 1WD Notes, we've gone full width. And I've taken the liberty of setting up a copy here at Lab Playground of our Responsive LabZip. And you can see that we've got a container, and I'm going to highlight this in fact. So what I like to do when I'm designing, here's a tip, is I like to create a temporary border to show me where stuff is. So when I go in here and I roll my mouse over the HTML DOM here, the structure, you could see that the body is full width, and then there's a container. And you can see it's highlighted in purple, but let me click on it and show you a trick. When I scroll down to the container element, I'm going to add a new attribute. And this is just in Firebug. It's not going to be saved, although I could if I wanted to keep it persistent while I'm designing. I'm going to hit Enter, Enter, and then I'm going to say Border, Tab, 1 pixel, Solid, and I just come up with different color for each element. So for example, for the container, I make that red. And now I can see the container. And one of the things I can also see is it's got an attribute, max width 960 pixels. So what's going on for Lucia is that the container is limiting us from having something full width, much like over on this page, right? We can see that the container here is probably true. Let's just actually inspect it. Let's roll our mouse. Actually, what's interesting is you can see here, we've got one container for the header, one for the slider, and one for the boxes. And so that gives them a little more freedom, but you can see that even inside of their header container, you've got the header, which has got a width of 1,000 pixels. So they kind of have the same thing going on. I'm going to show you a trick how to get around this. And there's two ways to do this, depending on your long-term goals. The first trick is, if your long-term goal is that you want to have the header and the footer be full width, just like we do at 1WDTV, or we've done it at 1WD Notes, or even some of the other sites, then we can modify the structure inside of the theme for the header PHP file or for the footer PHP file. But if you want to do a second way, a cheating the system way, a quick and dirty way, we can do this with some CSS only. And it's quick and dirty because it's not the proper way to do it. It's not the way you want to do it long term. But if you just have one thing you want to change, we might be able to get away with it. And that's by using negative margins in the CSS. So let's see how this plays out. First of all, let's just color the header area to give us some feeling of what we're going to do. And even though this isn't perfect, because again, I could do it over here and show you they've got a different menu set up, and that's a whole nother question. Let's just show you the whole idea of making the header area white and keep it simple, because this rule will apply elsewhere. So I've selected the header division, and I'm going to go ahead and enter. I'm going to say background, and I'll make a color of white, which is FFFFF, 6 Fs. Okay. And you can see already when we roll our mouse over the container, we see we've got that margin, right? And that margin is going to haunt us a little bit anyway, but that's okay. That's why we have this gap here. Let's now see what happens if we do some negative margins. Right now it's a margin of 0. Remember we talked before, when you're having anything like a numerical value, that there's potentially 4 values in there. It is, first number is always top, just like a clock. Think of it like a clock. The first one is 12 o'clock high. That's, the first figure. Top, and then the next one after the space is a right figure. That's like your 3 o'clock. The second one is your bottom. You're going clockwise now, so that's like your 6 o'clock figure. And the next one is the left, and that would be sort of like your 9 o'clock. And now if I add some numbers, you'll see what I'm talking about. So let's see if we went for the top and we added a pixel value, 10 pixel, and we can make it, see how it's moving down there? 30, 40, 50 pixels. Let's see if I went to the left. So remember, top, right, bottom, left. Let's do 60 pixels on the left. You see how that's bumping that bad boy over? Now I want you to see something though. Notice how it's contained within the container. Contained within the container. So even though I'm adding a margin, it's pushing it into no man's land. And the idea is that by default, the container is hiding all of the things that don't have space to be viewed. So as you push the left margin, everything is going to disappear to the right. And one of the things I can do here to show this more graphically is the same trick I just did before with the container. So I'm going to do border. This time I'm going to do 1 pixel solid blue. And you can see now where that is more vividly. Now let's try something. I'm going to show you an attribute that sometimes can be used to diagnose these things. It's called the overflow. Overflow hidden will keep things hidden, and in some case allow elements to line up properly. Sometimes if I say visible, it'll help me too. In this case, it's not doing anything because the container is cutting it off hard. So I didn't actually get any more value out of that. But in this case, it doesn't hurt us either because we're not worried about what's happening on the left and the right at the moment. But keep in mind that if these particular elements were on the right side, these nav items, that they might start disappearing. In fact, let's just see. I'm just curious. Let's see what happens if we change that nav stuff. And instead of it floating left, we float those right. Now, let's go back up. Let's see what happens. Visibility hidden. Oops. I'm in overflow. Hidden. Okay. Now let's crank up the margin. Actually, it's interesting. So what's happening here, and this is sometimes I have to experiment too, the stuff floating to the right is not being affected. It's just basically bringing the left side to the right. And that's good to know. So sometimes you got to play. That's why I love Firebug. It's like a giant sandbox. So what I'm going to do here, though, is get back to my main point. And let's refresh the page. I'm going to set this up again from scratch. I'm going to inspect. I'm going to make the container with a border. 1 pixel, solid red. And I hope you noticed that by refreshing the page, I can start over. So if we wanted to save this stuff, we have to save it to our LabZip custom CSS file. But if we don't want to save it, we can just play around and then refresh it. It's like an Etch-a-Sketch, really, is what it is. Next, that header. So we're going to go over here, scroll up, and I'm going to do border 1 pixel solid blue. And I'm going to say background, FFF. Okay. Now let's play with that negative margin. So what happens if on the margin, remember I have 4 values? Well, I was going to say, and I didn't get to finish, you can also cheat it and do it 2 values. So if I do 0 and 0, that's top and bottom, and this is left and right. So I can represent, let's say, a margin top and bottom of 20 pixels, or I can do margin left and right of 20 pixels, and I only need 2 numbers. So that's a nice shortcut way to do it, and it's also a more streamlined CSS. In this case, let's see what happens if I was to say, okay, margin top of 0, margin left and right of 0. Now, what if I go negative on the left and right? 10 pixels. Hey, look at that. Look what's happening. Whoa. See what's going on there? So I could, in theory, extend the header out beyond the borders of the container. Now remember, I said that's dangerous. Why is that dangerous? Well, it's dangerous because what could happen here is that this is a responsive layout, right? And it may look great now at 106 pixels, but if the screen of the user wasn't exactly the width of mine now, this is going to cause a problem, right? This is going to cause something where the thing is going to look good at one size, but it's going to be the wrong size and shape on another size. So even though we can use this, we shouldn't abuse it. It's my new rhyme of the day. So how else can we pull this off? Well, another way we can pull it off is if we simulate the idea of having a white header and we bump the position of the navigation higher, even though the background is being taken care of by the body. All right, so let me show you what I mean by that. Let's get rid of the color of the header background. And let's pretend that we're going to use the thing that's already full width here. Remember I said we can shortcut this with CSS? What if we added some space between where the container starts and where the body is, right? So let's, if I go to the container, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a margin at the top here. Now let's see, I do 40 pixels. Let's get a little crazy. Let's even do like, well, that's a little too much, maybe 120. Okay. Now, this looks kind of weird by itself, but watch. What if I went to the body? Actually, in this case, I'm going to go to the HTML. And the HTML, if I put a background, made that white. Did you see what I just did? I went to the root of the the object model here, and I made the core, the HTML, which is basically the underlying canvas on which this entire thing sits, white. So we've got the body sitting above it, and we've got the background core white. Now this isn't really super ideal either, but again, I'm trying to tell you how you can cheat the system. Now, what would happen if we were to go back up here, take the header, do the same thing. Let's do the margin, And we're going to make sure we've got a left and right designated so it doesn't affect the left and right. And we're going to do negative 10 pixels. Let's see what happens here. Oh, interesting. Look at this. Wow. So I'm actually able, in a weird way, to cheat the system a little bit. Because all I did is with some CSS, and now we're going to hide the blue. See what I did? I basically pushed the body ID, the body, all the way down. And I colored the background white and then pulled the header up. Now, again, this isn't the perfect example, and it's not a perfect way to do it, especially with responsive, because things can get weird. But I just wanted you to see how powerful things can be with CSS. Because ultimately, you can really align anything any way you want. It's almost like a puzzle where each piece has its own layer, and you can just position it and move it and do some crazy stuff. Now, if I was going to continue with this metaphor, I'd want to make sure that this was locked in. So I would probably use a thing called positioning. And it's more advanced than I'm going to do here, but basically the idea is that instead of the item, in this case the element I should say, being in a relative position to the other things it's within. So you see, for example, how the header is relatively within the container. I can use something called absolute. So if I was going to go through this, I do position absolute. And that causes all kinds of other weirdness, of course. But what it does do is it locks the header into an absolute position on the canvas relative to the canvas instead of relative to the elements before and after it. And again, that's kind of a choo-choo train effect. If you kept the metaphor going, if you had two choo-choo cars, I have little kids, that's why I say choo-choo, they are relative to each other. If one goes faster, it pulls the other one with it. If one goes slower, it slows the other one down. If one's coming up quickly, it's going to run into the one in front of it, or they're coupled together. Whereas when you use absolute positioning, it says, no, you're on your own track. You're like a stake in the ground. Okay. So I've shown you some of these things. Now, when you make these changes, if you're going to do CSS, remember you're going to take them, as I just said, and you're going to copy the definition of whatever it is that you wanted, and you're going to move it over to your CSS style sheet. So just to show you what I would do is I would open up, let me get transmit. I would open up the LabZip-custom CSS. I'm going to open it with Smoltron. And for example, I would paste it in here, save it, and then I would continue to edit. Now, I'm not making that change, so I'm not going to save it, but I just want you to remind yourself of that. Okay, so let's go forward with what we really are going to do. For some reason, the Smoltron is being persistent on me. Okay, so there we go. Let's reload this page and talk about how we can do this more effectively with a structural change. Now, what we really need to do here structurally is to sort of get the header area outside of this container's restrictions. And the way we do this is if we're going to go into our transmit, we're going to look for the header PHP file and take a peek inside. And what we'll find, and don't be freaked out here, this code may look imposing, but it's really not, is that we can identify, aha, here's that container, here's the division header, and all the stuff that goes with it, and then look for the other things that we can identify, such as the wrapper. And now let's go back and try to see where those are inside of the structure. Well, it's pretty simple, right? We got body, here's the container, here's header, here's wrapper. So really all we want to do is let's copy out the header and move it above the container. See what happens. One of the things we want to do is we want to first duplicate this. I'm going to duplicate the header PHP. I'm going to save it as a header copy. I'm going to say, oh, today's the 9th of September, so 09/09/13. That means the 9th month, 9th day of the 13th year. That way I'll know if I mess this up, I can go back to that without too much trauma. All right. Otherwise, we're going to open this with Smoltron, and actually we don't need both of them, so let's only use one of them. And let's look for the header. And it's right here. Now, there's a couple of things I want to point out real quick while we're here teaching you. There's something called hooks, which are really powerful, and we'll get to those later. And those are ways that you can, with a little snippet of code, inject something into place without having to open up and modify the template files. And so you'll see hooks all throughout the Responsive LabZip theme. This one is the responsive header hook. And this means that you can inject or add stuff. I don't know, it could be a slideshow, it could be an image, it could be an advertisement banner, without actually going in and modifying the template file simply by referencing this hook. It's sort of like a bus stop. You can just say, hey, stick this advertisement over at the before the header bus stop and have them wait for me there. But what we're going to do is copy that and the header stuff, and we're going to move it above the container. So let's keep going down until we see the end of the header area. And what I'm looking for is this particular series of things here, and I'll just highlight them again. You look for the end division tag, and it's give you a little hint here. It says this is the end of the header. And we're going to also grab the after header hook. So in case we want to use the hook later, it's in the right relative position. So we grab this whole thing, and I'm going to, in this case, cut it. And all I'm going to do is look for that container and the container hook. I'm going to go right above it. I'm going to add that in. Okay, so you see how the container is here, the container hook is there, the body is there. I'm going to stick it right in the middle, hard left. I'm going to paste, and now I'm going to save it. Now let's go back and refresh our page and see how that's messed up our page. Hey, whoa, look at that. It messed it up in the best of ways because now the header is free from the constraints of the container. And now we can have a party, right? We just did this before. So hey, background, FFF, FFF, woohoo! We can leave the navigation, we can change the navigation, we can do whatever we want here because we're free. In fact, inspect with Firebug. Let's say I want to change the background because I'm going to make this transparent. I'm going to get rid of the image, none. And of course, those things are floating in a weird way and they've got some weird font issues. So let's change those a bit. So I'm going to say float right. And I could do my position absolute. Whoops, I'll keep it relative. I'm going to change the margin, -10 pixels. Whoops, I forgot my second value. There we go. That's actually not going to work, so let's leave the margin alone. Let's move those up a bit. I'm doing this real quick, not to exactly do it, but just to give you an idea how much fun this could be. Margin top, -10 pixels. Doesn't like that. I'm trying to figure out what I need. I need to modify the main nav to bump that up. Okay, so say width 50%, float right, margin top. I know I lost the white thing there, so I'll fix that in a second. 10 pixels. Okay. So what's happening here is I'm playing around, and actually, that's why I'm so quiet. I'm trying to figure out a way that I can make the header keep going. Remember I told you about that overflow? So what's happening is the header and the elements inside of it are all relative to each other. And when I cause this little navigation to float, it's causing the background of this to get sort of squished up and thrown in the garbage. So we're going to do something that should work. We're going to say overflow hidden. Aha, see, it works. So basically what that does is that gives instructions. It says if you've got these two things conflicting, just go ahead and hide the overflow part and just let them overlap. I guess that's the layman's way to say it, but I've been doing this long enough that I just want to teach you that there's this one attribute you can use. And now what we can do is I'm just going to give you an idea because I know what he was looking for. So let's say go to -70, and those little left-hand doodads are bugging me. Those little decorations, these, I think these are text shadows. Let's see, I'll get rid of that, and we got to make the color of that something that will stand out. I'm doing this quick and dirty style, and then we got this left margin, which I think is on the list item. be wrong. No, it's on the A, so we want to get rid of that left margin, which is bugging me. Sometimes I have to explore it myself to figure out where it is. Border left, there it is. Okay, so let's make it 0. Okay, so now what have I accomplished? Well, hey, check it out. Not exactly perfect, but for quick and dirty, you can see that it is possible to get this thing set up in a different way. And so let's review what I did here, because my intention is not to teach you full CSS. It's to show you some tricks on structure. What we basically learned here was first a CSS trick how to do this quick and dirty style, which may work for some cases, but in our case better. So we went in and made a duplicate of our header PHP. We went and opened up the header PHP file and we copied out the actual block of code that we needed to get outside of the container. And that was the, refreshing my memory here, go back. Where did you go? There we go. Okay, we had the container here. We took the whole header, including the hooks, and we moved it up above the container. And the net result is that then by adding a little CSS styling, we can have this full width header area with its own color, fully distinct from the rest. Now, in another tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can actually do this uniquely for the home page or any other page by using what's called a conditional tag. In this case, there's a body tag that lets you know when you're on the home page, and there's other kind of conditionals that we can also use as well. But I think this one has gone long enough, so I'm going to break this up here, and we're going to probably make this part of a course. So I'll release this to the crowd and let everybody absorb it, enjoy it. And if you're not a member of 1WTV, please come on in, because there's lots of good stuff like this inside. And if you are a member, look forward to giving you the rest of the course on how to use some of these customization tricks with your Responsive LabZip theme. This is Spence, the evil genius, and I'll see you next time.